Listen to the word that God is speaking. Listen to the one who is close at hand. Listen to the voice behind creation. Listen even if you don't understand. They came to Jericho as he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho. Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he cried out even more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed Jesus on the way. This is the word of the Lord.
I'm changing my plan here. I'm going to use this instead of my computer so I can walk around a little bit. Joe and I were in Texas last weekend. Thank you guys very much for making do without us. I heard that the music was great, and I'm excited. Thank you to the singers and Joseph and Berto who couldn't make it this morning. So there's the story that this oil tycoon makes all his money. He's from Ireland, and so after he's bought everything and done everything, he decides he's going to retrace his roots. And so he goes back to Ireland, and he drives out in the middle of nowhere to where his people supposedly come from, and he knocks on the door of this little shack, and he encounters a guy called Seamus. And sure enough, Seamus is his kin, and Seamus says, "Sure, yeah, this is where we come from. Let me show you the place. Everything out to that rusty tractor, from here, the house to the tractor, that's all mine. Out there to that rundown old fence out there, everything from here to there, that's all mine, all my property. Out there, you see that? That's not a creek, that's actually some industrial waste. But everything from here to there, that's all my property as well. Same out back. That's all my property." And the Texan sort of laughs at him, because this guy's such an idiot. And he says, "Back at home in Texas, so I can get on my pickup truck first thing in the morning. I drive north all day. Don't touch the edge of my land. And go east. Drive, sunrise to sunset, never get to the edge of my property. West, same thing. South, put my foot to the floor and drive all day. I won't get to the edge of my property." And Seamus goes, "Oh, don't worry about that. I have a busted old truck like that too." Texas was a trip. Joe and I, the first morning we were there, we were trying to get coffee, and it was a Sunday morning. It was last Sunday. You all were here getting ready to worship. And nothing was open, and we walked into a place called Black Rifle Coffee Company, which we should have known because of the name. But we walked in, and the first T-shirt on a little stand in this coffee shop was a very colorful rooster with an AK-47, and it said, "F your sensitivity." By definition, I haven't had my coffee yet. And I'm like defensive here. We talked a few weeks ago about the golden rule, right? Treat others how you want to be treated. This experience showed me that that's not enough. There are limits to the golden rule, right? Because there's a whole coffee shop for people who want to be treated that way. I don't want to be treated that way. I suspect others don't either. F your sensitivity. That's not me. Don't treat me the way that you want to be treated. How many of you guys have ever loved someone? And the way they wanted to love you, they wanted you to feel love that way. The way they really wanted you to feel loved, but for whatever reason, you just didn't feel loved. They came to Jericho. Jesus, his disciples, this large crowd together. They're leaving a city, and a blind man called Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, we'll come back to that, sitting by the road begging. So Mark tells us about a place and a crowd and a person. The place is Jericho. For those of you who came up in any sort of Christian religion, is Jericho a familiar place? Does that name sound familiar? Some nods. No one's willing to raise their hand. I won't get called on, but I'll nod. This is a symbol in the cultural memory of the Israelites. This is a place where what fell down? Walls. Cool. All right. So there's some here. So walls fell down, and the walls came down to make a way for the Israelites for their new future, to fulfill their vision. So they walked around Jericho. How many times? How many? Say it proud. 7. Okay. There's like 3 people. Like 7, 6, 7, 8. It's 7. 7 times. The story says 7 times, which is, that's like a magic number in the Bible. 7's important. 7 days of creation. So 7 times the story says, and the walls come down and they find their place of rest. Remember, Israel, they're a restless people. They're people without a home. They're people without a place. They're outside these walls, keeping them from their sense of home, from rest. And so they shouted down these walls. They walked around Jericho 7 times. They shouted, and the walls came down. So the crowd now, in the story, fast forward to Jesus, the crowd here is Jesus, the disciples, and a sizable following, the text says, the ones whose ancestors brought down the walls of Jericho. And they encountered a person, a blind beggar by the road. Mark names him, which is weird. Are you familiar with the Gospels? Mark is the first written, and it's the shortest. He's not trying to give you a whole bunch of details, just kind of right through. So he very rarely names people in healing stories. It's usually just a nameless, faceless person. But here he names Bartimaeus, and he does it twice. Bartimaeus, Timaeus' son, right? Bar means son of. So Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, Timaeus' son. And the point is, Mark's saying this is not someone you get to overlook in the story. You can't let this person remain nameless. Someone without a story, without a history, without a family, without a tragedy, something we all have. It's a poor blind beggar, and this person is more. This is a person who can't be ignored. In the scriptures, to know someone's name is to have not only an intimate connection, but a sense of responsibility for that person, to be able to know and hold their name, to bear responsibility. But there's a tension here because Bartimaeus is named, and a poor blind beggar would have been considered by the Israelites, because of their religion, to be marginalized. A poor blind beggar would have been the other, unclean, a sinner, outside the community of faith, beyond the harmony of God, ignored, forgotten, whatever, right? These people that we're making amends to. So when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." So picture this. Outside the walls of Jericho, this marginalized, excluded, restless beggar is the one shouting. He's not shouting for money. He's not asking for alms for the poor. He's not even asking to be healed. He's shouting for mercy. And what does that mean in this context? What is mercy? He's shouting to be noticed by Jesus. I know that's not a profound theology of mercy, but it's got to start there, right? He's shouting first and foremost just to be noticed by Jesus. Joe and I have this habit, especially when we're riding around with the kids, we want to model it for them, where if we've got a little bit of cash and somebody asks for it, we give it, right? So if we're on the sidewalk or at a car at the light, and just recently, last week, we were at this light in downtown Orlando, and this guy was looking really rough. He was sitting up on a wall, and when you're sitting up high and your legs are full of blood and to jump down, it's just going to be agony for him to walk out. So Joe gets out of the car, runs over, and gives him a few bucks. He appreciated it a ton. And we love the kids. Like, now they notice. There's an intersection in DeLand we go by, and they don't see the couple that usually is there, and they go, "I wonder if they're okay." And we say a prayer for him. Bartimaeus is shouting for mercy, but he's shouting to be seen. He's shouting to be noticed. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, panhandling laws. The crowd, the Israelites whose ancestors had shouted down the walls of Jericho, hear this shouting blind beggar, and they say, be quiet. This beggar is shouting for mercy, which means he has faith that mercy is real, that mercy is possible, not as a concept, not as a theological idea, but mercy is something that he might receive in this life and actually that might help him out that day. He's shouting for that kind of mercy. This blind beggar is having a moment of desperation and hope. That's a heck of a definition for faith, but that's the experience, I think, very often of faith. The moment of desperation and hope. Look at me, notice me, be merciful to me. And what do the religious people do? They so often do. They try to shut him down. This is one of the many things that we're confessing, for which we've been preparing to make amends. The many people we're writing on these lists to whom we have talked when we should have listened. The people we've told to be quiet when we should have amplified their voice. The people whose difference scared us when it might have filled us with wonder. They try to shut him down, but he won't be quiet. He shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. He won't be silenced by proper church folks. He won't be silenced by proper church folks, Katie, right? Anybody relate to that? Jesus stops and says, call this man forward. Jesus won't let him go unnoticed. Jesus seems to understand that this blind man has some deeper sight, some foresight or some insight. His own disciples and the crowds who have been following him and listening to him and saying, Jesus, we love your teaching. Jesus, we want to sit beside you in your kingdom. Jesus, when you violently overthrow Rome, we want to be number one and number two in your new empire. These people following around, they don't get it. And Jesus realizes this blind man outside the gates of Jericho gets it. They're blind. But this blind beggar who's sitting outside these walls, shouting for the walls that their religion has erected, that divide who's in and who's out, who's clean and unclean, who's pure and impure. These walls that the Israelites themselves have built again in the midst of Jericho, where they knocked the walls down. These walls exclude and reject and isolate and marginalize everyone named on that list you wrote this morning. The emotional, spiritual walls that have been created in this religion to keep people from God and from sacred community. Blind Bartimaeus, who truly sees, he's shouting for these walls to come down. Have mercy on me, notice me, say my name, humanize me. Don't treat me the way you want to treat me. Don't you dare. Treat me the way I want to be treated. As a human, as a child of God, as someone you don't get to ignore or step around, somebody with a name and a history and a tragedy, like everyone in this room. The tradition that tore down the physical walls of Jericho had rebuilt religious walls. Walls that had to be torn down in the name of mercy, so that people in need, and by the way, we are all, every one of us in need, so that people in need can be noticed. First and foremost, you guys fill me with hope when you greet each other at the beginning of the service, because I don't know what you're going to get from a sermon or from ritual or from music, but God, if you guys will look each other in the eye once a week, I feel like we have some hope. To be noticed as a person. Jesus stops and says, call him forward. So they call the blind man. Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you. He throws his cloak aside, he jumps to his feet, he comes to Jesus. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. Say that with me. What do you want for me to do for you? What do you want for me to do for you? One more time with me. What do you want for me to do for you? I still don't think you've got it. One more time. What do you want for me to do for you? You guys just learned one of the most powerful spiritual practices you will ever know. We said a couple weeks ago the golden rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. Do unto others the way you want them to do with you. And it's great, right? This is Karen Armstrong is a religious scholar. She passed recently this last year or so. But she wrote a book on the golden rule in all of the major world religions. There's this fantastic story where the Rabbi Hillel, one of his disciples, who's really kind of a smart aleck, comes to Rabbi Hillel and he says, Rabbi, can you recite the whole of the Torah while standing on one leg? And Rabbi Hillel, that which is harmful to your neighbor, hold on, I messed it up. That which is harmful to yourself, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole of the Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and study it. He summarizes it with the golden rule, which again, fantastic. What's harmful to yourself, don't do to your neighbor. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. When I was being trained probably 10 or 11 years ago now, as an LGBTQ safe zone trainer at Stetson, actually, I learned what's called the platinum rule, which is not treat others the way you want to be treated, but treat others the way they want to be treated. And with that comes the practice. Ask, right? What does Jesus say to this blind beggar? What do you want me to do for you? How do you want to be treated? Don't assume it's like you. How does this other person want to be treated? Don't assume they want to be treated like you, right? And this is tough. This is ego work. Decenter yourself as the main character in their story, right? Let yourself not be the main character in their story. How do they want to be treated? What do you want me to do for you? And for me, this is where the action is, or the magic, or the revelation. The theological term is the juice. This is where the juice is. This is where I think the healing actually takes place. By the time Bartimaeus' sight is physically restored, right? By the time his physical sight is restored, it's by far symbolic and secondary to the healing that has already occurred. A social, spiritual, and communal healing. Right? The physical sight is the symbol for these things. The deeper healing is not that he could see, but that he had been seen. Not that he could see, but that he had been seen. The overlooked, the marginalized, the unnoticed, the intentionally excluded, the religiously rejected, othered beggar has been seen. The dehumanized one has been humanized. The ignored one has been asked and listened to. The unnamed one has been named. Do you see why the miracle of him seeing is so secondary to the miracle of him being seen? Technology is here, right? We're going to be able to do corrective eye surgery. Everybody that can't see is going to be able to see, the next 10 years, 15 years? All this junk is still so messed up. The number of people we walk around not able to see. People unable to see us. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Is this what people are calling out for? Our culture is calling out for, right? Not magical sight, but to be seen. The Me Too movement. LGBTQ pride. Black Lives Matter. The families of the victims of gun violence, mass shootings. Climate crisis, activism. I mean, guys, women, the sacred queer community, Black lives, victims of gun violence, and our very earth are crying out to be seen. Crying out to be seen. If you wonder what we're making amends for, it's that so often in the face of those cries, the church has responded, hush, psh, 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 more walls. Be quiet. And we're forgiven, right? You said that? We're forgiven. We have listed those we have harmed and those we have hushed and the walls that we built with great intentions that someone told us to build and we didn't know any better. We've named them. We're on month 8. We're doing the work. We're becoming ready to make amends. Isn't Mark an extraordinary writer? Right? He does this thing, seeing versus being seen. And then the walls of Jericho coming down are secondary to the walls in our hearts coming down. Right? You think modern film is great? The gospel writers are geniuses. Isn't it easier to tear down some physical walls than to tear down the walls that keep us from seeing the other, from seeing each other, from seeing all others? I mean, that you guys have heard the announcements, right? Who knows? Who knows our relationship to these walls in the coming days? And I'm intentional to say days and not years. Who knows? Who knows our relationship to these walls? And we have a relationship. We've named the grief about all the good that is done here, that has been done here, that's come from here, that lived first in these walls. We don't know our relationship to these walls in the coming days. But we do know, because we keep showing up and doing the work, that these walls are coming down with extreme prejudice. We won't allow racism to live here anymore. We won't allow the walls of sexism to live in here anymore. I don't know where church is going to be next year, but I know that wherever we are, we're not going to allow those walls to live here or here anymore. Jesus calls Bartimaeus forward. He doesn't assume he knows what he needs. He doesn't interrupt and say, well, obviously you're blind, you must want to be healed. Or say, actually, I'm not healing today, but here's a $5 Subway coupon. Or like, I'm sorry, I actually can't take drachma today, the machine is down. So, Jesus is intuitive, right? I mean, we all, like, part of the reason we're into him is he's very intuitive. He's discerning, he's tuned in. He reads people, right? We agree on that. Jesus can read people. He probably could have guessed what Bartimaeus needed, right? He's been doing this. He's traveling the whole Galilee. Like, he knows what people need. He could have guessed. This is what made him so compelling to so many crowds. He has a really tight bead on what people need and their pain points and their trauma. He steps right into it. He meets them right there. He could have read Bartimaeus all day long. He didn't. He asked, and he listened. What do you want me to do for you? Because Jesus, he's not fixing a problem. He's honoring the dignity of a person. He's acknowledging the worth and value of a person. The beginning of the platinum rule is to see the other, then to remove yourself from the center of loving your neighbor by asking. To remind yourself that you cannot love someone while you're judging them. And it's very hard to love them if you're assuming they're like you. Treat others the way they want to be treated. See them, ask them, love them. Amen.